This is where the big boys play, huh? We ain't here to play. At the total combined weight. At the total combined weight of 589 pounds.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, at well over 500 pounds, this is where the big boys play.
Thank you so much, Tony and Larry, as we continue to have a dark cloud hang over the WCW in the form of not only Hall and Nash, but now there's Hulk Hogan in the mix. I cannot believe that he has double-crossed all of his fans all across generations and across the universe. It is a bad situation, a dire situation. Tony, Larry, back to you.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is At a Combined Weight. I'm your host, Charlie Dudley, and that was Robert McElroy doing his Mean Gene impression. Of course, today we're going to talk about Bash the Beach 1996. How you doing?
I'm large. I'm well. I'm doing just fine, man. I enjoyed getting to see this entire pay-per-view as opposed to getting to see just kind of a match here and there in the bubble that you and I always talk about on this show.
Right.
So let's just get into it, my man.
Yeah, let's jump right into it. Bash the Beach 1996, highest buy rate since Bash the Beach 1995 for WCW. Surprisingly enough, didn't do a huge buy rate, but I guess people just really didn't care about the undercard very much. And WCW did an hour pre-show that had 4 matches on it. Steiner's Harlem Heat, Bobby Walker, Billy Kidman, Rock and Roll Express, Norton and Ice Train, and Eddie Guerrero, Lord Steven Regal. None of the matches went longer than 5 minutes, so we're not going to really talk about it. But the show opens with a vignette with some sweet mid-90s instrumental guitar WCW type music showing the invasion angle and all its happenings with, you know, an intermittent quote here and there. And they would show it again before the match began.
Right, but call me spoiled and call me a product of the times, but I feel like the WWE currently does such a good job with video packages that this was just like, I don't know, I felt like they got an intern down at TNT to just kind of like give it the old college try.
It was cheesy as hell, and it was very 1996-esque for sure.
And for such a hot angle, such an incredible, historic storyline, it just kind of didn't get its due, but, you know, you do what you can.
Right. So the show begins. Eric Bischoff he didn't host the pre-show. He was nowhere to be found. Dusty suggests that they're holding him hostage. This pushing the third man idea begins and goes well into the main event. Without further ado, let's jump right into the matches. Show opens, Rey Mysterio-Psicosis. We talked about this on the Nitro previously. This is obviously the best match on the show. No doubt about it. Rey Mysterio-Psicosis know each other really well from their days in ECW. These guys would build a great foundation for the Cruiserweight division. What did you think about it?
It was absolutely fantastic. They stick with tradition here by bringing out Mike Tenay. It was just a lot of high-flying action. The Hurricane Ranas, they finally start to call it that as opposed to the Frankensteiner. They called it the Frankensteiner the first portion of the match. I know we had talked about when they're going to start calling it that. This kind of marks that when that happens. It's funny how Heenan pointed out. He's like, oh wow, they're actually back in the ring now. For a while they're just kind of passing through because so much of the action took place outside of the ring, above it, on top of the turnbuckles and what have you.
Right.
They used the entire arena as their ring, not in the way Kevin Sullivan, Chris Benoit do, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I thought it was a really hot, fun opener. Loved the ending sequence, the Splash Mountain into the Rana for Mysterio. Mysterio gets the win, propelling him to a title shot that he'll receive on Nitro, which they didn't talk about that. I just know that from watching, obviously. Backstage segment with Konnan. Gene puts over Tonnan's tough schedule, how he wrestled in Mexico last night and just came in on a flight. Kind of just a, whatever segment here.
Well, it's a very quick, brief promo, as they usually do with Konnan. Konnan does point out, and I thought it was wise to, that, I haven't been around that long. I don't have an entourage like Flair does.
Right, and it's interesting to note that Konnan would end up with a faction, an entourage in the NWO, and then after he leaves the NWO, he ends up with the Filthy Animals. So he goes from a guy that hasn't been there long enough to have an entourage to being a guy that doesn't go anywhere without one. Up next, we had Big Bubba versus John Tenta in the silver dollar match. The coins are in a sack on the top of a pole. Very Vince Russo-esque. Insert item, put it on top of a pole. How fucking high was this pole?
Yeah, it was so high, and the announcers were smart enough to put over the fact that,
it was high as shit, yeah.
Very high, and how the hell was John Tenta going to get his big ass up there?
Yeah, they were making fun of how fat he
something.
was. They were making fun of how fat he was. They were like, there's no way he's getting up that pole. No way. And Heenan drops the line, when Tenta was born, he was 187 pounds.
Though, he was a big-ass baby.
Yeah. But, as soon as, I never really noticed it, and I'd seen the match before, but, I didn't really pay attention, but, when, you're watching it for this, you kind of pay a little more attention, but, Tenta and Big Bubba stand up on the turnbuckle, and they're a good 10 feet away from the top of it. You had to get damn Jimmy Hart to shimmy up the thing. And he weighs about 100
Which was well done.
pounds.
I thought that was funny.
Yeah, it was good. I thought it was, the match was okay for what it was. I thought it would have been cool, how John Tenta tries to take off the ratchet straps, if he had actually taken off the ratchet straps and pulled the pole down into the ring with him. I thought that would have been
good. Yeah, I like the way they did it. I wonder, just thinking about it here, talking about it with you, how interesting of a ladder match this would have been.
Yeah, has to be some big
ladders. The weight limit on some of those aluminum ladders is like 275, 300.
Oh yeah, it's 300 easy. You could get a big weight limit, but you couldn't do a spot with two of them on there.
No, someone would fucking die.
Yeah, it would break in half and stab them to death in the middle of the ring in Daytona.
Yeah, no good. But it was interesting gimmicky match. This card was full of gimmicky matches. I mean, when would we ever see a silver dollar match again? How often would we get a tape fist match, when we get to that? Right. When would we see that shit again? And it was funny. I like how Tenta got smart enough to get a hold of the scissors, cut one of the straps. And, and this rivalry, this feud went on just long enough.
Yeah.
Had it gone on another week, I'd have been absolutely sick of it.
Tenta's got a feud with somebody, so I don't know, honestly. I didn't really follow the storyline arc for John Tenta post Third Man Bash of the Beach, so I don't know what's up next for him, to be honest. But I know that Bubba ends up part of the NWO, but I'm not sure when. Again, all that kind of just blends together. But Tenta gets the win after he takes the coin sock from Jimmy Hart, slugs Bubba with it, gets the win. Then we have a backstage segment with Team WCW, Macho Man, Sting, and Luger, pushing the main event and then the Third Man. All the guys have face paint on. Only thing that I really noticed out of this was that Macho Man was commenting on everything that somebody said. Every time they said something, he was like, yeah, freak out. I love that.
Well, I wonder if, he had it in mind that maybe he knew Sting and Luger needed some help with that, because they aren't good promo guys, and he is. So maybe he felt like he needed to kind of, prop them up a bit.
Yeah.
And coach them. But I did notice his commentary throughout.
Yeah, I thought it was amusing. Up next, you had DDP, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, tape fist match. I did not think this match was very good at all.
No, it wasn't.
One of the things that was real bad about it is I don't feel like the commentary team, Dusty Rhodes especially, watched the match. Dusty, at one point, he wasn't paying attention, and he missed the fact that DDP cut the tape off of Jim Duggan's fist. I mean, like, probably 5 or 6 minutes later, he says something about it. And
I remember seeing the tape fist remnant in the ring, going like, when the hell did that happen?
So you missed it too. You were hanging out with Dusty Rhodes in McElroy land, apparently.
Me and Dusty were in McElroy land, kicking it. I can't think of a better place to be with anybody, especially in McElroy land, than with Dusty Rhodes.
If you will.
I liked the typical Hacksaw stuff with him coming in and that entrance music, the 2x4, all the other things we pop about in McElroy land, and how he automatically gets that crowd in his corner and they are with him to the end. But it being a taped fist match, this was just a regular match.
Yeah, it wasn't anything to write home about, for sure.
It wasn't, and
there wasn't enough heat, I don't think, for the tape fist gimmick, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then when DDP does get the diamond cutter on him, Hacksaw has not even like a prolonged moment of this writhing in pain. He almost gets right up from it, tapes his fist, and hits him. Right. That's a finishing move, and a very good one that had been pushed. You need to be laying down there a little longer than the split second.
Yeah, you're right.
A nitpicky thing, but something I noticed. This was, it didn't even need to be called a tape fist match.
No, not at all.
It's a regular match. It wasn't like they were going up a big ass pole to have to get a thing of tape.
No, not at all. Up next, you had a backstage segment with the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, the Giant, and Jimmy Hart, cutting a promo on the Horsemen.
The best part of this was the very beginning.
Mean Gene
Okerlund. Jimmy Hart, come over here, you little twerp.
Yeah.
And what makes that even funnier are for those of you listeners that watch Legends House. And Mean Gene gets pissed off at Jimmy Hart a time or two in that house. Yeah, with talking about how Jimmy Hart, sometimes he doesn't know when to shut the hell up. And so to see him 20 years prior to all that, and get over here, you little twerp, that was my favorite part of it.
Yeah, and he told him to brush his teeth at the end. Will you brush your teeth?
He did. Give
so that was the best part of that whole thing was Jimmy Hart getting heat from Gene. That's pretty much it.
That's it. And if you haven't seen Legends House, by God, watch it. Or if you're Charles Edward Dudley II and you're only 3 or 4 in, you need to finish that shit.
Up next, entrance segment with Lee Marshall, Arn, and Benoit. Arn cuts a promo on the Outsiders, and then Sullivan and Giant. Pretty decent promo. Leads into our next match, which was Public Enemy, Nasty Boys, dog collar match. Public Enemy comes out with a table. The match saw Sags was chained to Rocco Rock, Knobbs was chained to Johnny Grunge. So they kind of paired off pretty much the entire match. Lots of plunder.
There's a whole lot of plunder. There's a lot of plunder. It's like Dusty Rhodes learned that word like a few weeks ago. So he always uses it. He looks forward to it's like this biggest word he knows other than mayonnaise. Hey, but a lot of plunder, Daddy. From a plunder. Loved that shit. And there was a lot of plunder. There really was.
Yeah.
They broke out the trash cans or the Coca-Cola cans in McElroy land.
Yeah, Grunge and Knobbs end up fighting in the dang sandbox. And Knobbs hits Grunge with a rubber shark. So that tells you all you need to know about the match, really. And then the Rocco Rock's dog collar busts. And then there's the finish, as Nasty Boys get the win. But the match just turned into a mess. The table wouldn't break. Johnny Grunge ends up outside the ring, like hanging, like he's hanging and choking to death. And then
It was a good-looking spot, though.
Oh,
because
yeah, it was.
As the chain is taut, they use it as a clothesline opportunity
For Rocco Rock to get clothesline. That ends up winning the match for him. I'm pretty sure Rocco Rock hits Knobs after the match with the chain and knocks the shit out of him. Like I don't think he was supposed to hit him with it, and I think Knobs just didn't get out of the way. And oh man, it clocks him clear on the top of the head into like his back of his neck and like halfway down his shoulder blades. And Shivani's like, he's out. He's knocked out.
Earlier when they were over in the sand with the damn rubber shark, which was stupid as shit.
Right.
But the announcers had a little too much fun with the puns and the goof. When Rocco Rock got up on the lifeguard stand, there's a lifeguard on duty, and Dusty's like, an inner tube is coming into play. And like, an inner tube? Like, don't you mean a life vest? Oh yeah. Where are the Beach Boys when you need them? Like,
yeah, it was very, very punny and corny from an announcer standpoint. Just a hardcore match. Just the plunder that you would come to expect from Public Enemy and the Nasty Boys in the coming weeks.
You know what kind of took me out of it, sort of, and just wasn't very good from a production value standpoint? You get those you got to watch the match on those tiny little screens.
And so much of it is gray. And it's like a picture in a picture on like a 15-inch television.
Well, it's what I'm looking at right now via Skype with you on your little screen and me on mine, and I'm supposed to watch. Had it been like larger screens or like maybe you do the entire screen and it's they're side by side, but your entire screen is taken up by wrestling action, I think would have made it a little better.
Yeah.
Still, 10-year-old Robert would have popped like hell because he loved the plunder. And I do now, but, I mean, I've seen better.
Oh, yeah. This was, for 1996, it was probably pretty good. But, you're never really going to have a great technical match with the Nasty Boys involved. I never thought they were very good. And frankly, I always hated them because they cost the Hart Foundation the tag team championships at WrestleMania 7.
Oh, that's so Charles to be this fucking homer.
I never got it.
I hate them, god damn it.
I hated them. I hated them from that point on.
Yeah, it's Homer City Johnson over here. It's good they got to follow the Tate Fist shit.
Yeah.
Like, if you got to follow, who wants to follow Psychosis Mysterio? If you're going to follow up something with something of your own, like, have it be something that sucks. You'll look that much better.
Right. Next
I
up.
didn't think, if I'm, give it a B-. I didn't hate it at all.
B-?
Yeah, fuck, that'll get you through school, Charles.
I would give it a C, if that. B-
is on the dean's list.
If I was drunk, I'd maybe give him a C. Up next, we had a backstage segment with Mean Gene. He's trying to discover the third man. Cops are blocking the way and protecting Mean Gene. Like, it was tough to tell if they were there for Mean Gene's protection or protecting the outsiders. Because Mean Gene kind of intimated that they were protecting him, but why do you need 4 guys to protect Mean Gene?
Well, because he's Smurl Haggard, Charles.
Yeah, but I mean, you could take 2 guys and completely surround his tiny ass.
Yeah, I mean, they've always had... It worked for the camera angle and all that. Like, having just 2 maybe might not have been as urgent.
Yeah.
Having 4, like, these 2 are huge and then Mean Gene isn't.
Yeah.
I got the vibe that they were there for kind of both. And I thought it was well done. I mean, it was perfectly necessary. Like, it gives the viewers the idea that we're that much closer to seeing them.
Right.
And so here we have Gene is not only used as a guy to just interview the wrestlers, he's also pushed in the kayfabe world as being a journalist.
Yeah, an investigator, like trying to find out who it is.
So he's trying to get some inside scoop, some inside knowledge, a sneak peek of who it is, and he's kind of he's the one letting Heenan and them know what's going on, hopefully.
Yeah. Up next, you had the Cruiserweight title on the line, Dean Malenko, Disco Inferno. Pretty much a nothing match. I thought it was a disservice to Malenko to even have to wrestle this clown town.
Well, look, hey, hold on a minute, man. Now, that's what we were expecting. That's not necessarily what we got. I was pleasantly surprised by this match because Disco actually can work a little bit.
Yeah, he can.
Malenko's a lot better, but Disco can work some, and that was put on display more in this match than it had been probably ever. Yeah. And props to the announcers for pushing the fact that, like, man, this Disco, he's got talent. He doesn't have focus worth of shit, and he's a goofball.
Right.
But he's got potential. And, like, he would.
Not to interrupt you, but I can't get into this match. If I just pull this out of the anthology of pay-per-views that are on the network available to me, I get the same out of this match as what we did. Actually, probably more, because I don't get the build to it. I don't see the heat or lack thereof. I just couldn't get into the match. There's really no point that Disco Inferno is getting a title shot. The build sucked. The match was okay, but it didn't have any heat to me. Like, why are they feuding? Does Dean Malenko hate? The build was shit. So
the build was garbage.
And so that's why it was kind of a nothing match to me. And this is where the Disco Inferno character kind of turns around.
Right.
Because he becomes more of a wrestling with a little bit of comedy rather than just a comedy gimmick. But if I'm going to have Dean Malenko in a match, I want him wrestling somebody that can go or somebody that he absolutely hates.
Yeah, and he hated Disco, but the build to the hatred wasn't worth a shit.
Right.
I think they.
I need my storylines to go along with my wrestling in this situation. I can watch a wrestling match in a bubble and say, hey, that was a great match. But that match, if it's a 6 out of 10, it can become an 8 out of 10 because of the build. And if this match was a 5 out of 10, I would give it a 3 out of 10 because the build was shitty going to it. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does, and I agree the build sucked, and I agree that you need to give Malenko somebody better, but props to the announcers for, I guess, scraping the bottom of this barrel.
Yeah.
I thought they were as pivotal to the match as the two talents were. Honestly, because it was as if you have like these like disappointed grandfathers looking at their grandson and Disco Inferno being like, dude, you got so much potential. What the hell are you doing? You had him beat and you started dancing. Because he would finally be able to create some offense. And he would dick around, then cover, then get the 2, and the announcers pushed how, like, come on, man, if you were just more focused, maybe you could win that Cruiserweight title.
Right.
Props to them for making it worth a shit. And, I mean, Disco really can work a little bit. And we are, and I've talked about this a lot, we are going to see the Disco character become more of a wrestler, not as much of a buffoonery.
Right.
So,
I wasn't a fan. You obviously liked it more than I did.
Well, yeah, but that I was expecting garbage. I got something that wasn't. I was that pleasantly surprised. You know, when you go into a situation knowing you're going to be disappointed and you come out of it going, well, damn, that wasn't so bad. That's how I felt. So
up next, we had Joe Gomez versus Mongo McMichael. I can't believe this was on the pay-per-view.
Oh, this sucks. This was such crap.
It seemed more like a WCW Pro or like not even a WCW Saturday Night, because those matches were better, but just kind of a nothing match that you could skip through. And they're pushing McMichael as a beast, and you know how this is one of his first couple matches, and he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. I would have much rather had like the Steiner's Harlem Heat match that ended in a DQ off of the pre-show. Swap that with this. I would have much rather seen the Steiner's Harlem Heat. At least they can work, and there was an issue between them. With this, it's 2 straight matches in a row, and you kind of, with the same with Conan and Flair, where like they were just matches that you kind of drew out of a hat and tried to throw them together. I mean, there was no heat on the Dean Malenko Disco Inferno, no heat in this one. Like, there's no problem between them. Like, yeah, Joe Gomez got beat up by Flair and Arn. Mongo never touched him. So it was no heat. We've already talked more about the match than I think we should have.
Well, it is fun. They did push the whole how Joe Gomez was a Chicago Bears fan.
Yeah.
And that whole
thing. You thought I was kidding when I brought that up the first time.
And sure enough, they bring it up again because, I mean, the announcers are trying to they're grasping for straws for heat here.
Right.
And I thought it sucked. And I'll be honest with you, as much as I adore the Horsemen and their place in the history of wrestling, and especially their resurgence around during this era when I was a kid, and I can remember a good time for the Horsemen, I've not been very compelled by that many of the storylines that they've been involved in. The dungeon thing, I'll be honest with you, doesn't really blow my skirt up the way it should. The Joe Gomez, Mongo McMichael thing is stupid as hell. Kevin Green, etc. I haven't really been all that much of a fan of what they've done with the Horsemen.
Yeah.
Except for a couple things, and obviously Flair's promos.
Speaking of Flair's promos, backstage segment with Flair and the ladies. Flair cuts a promo on Conan, puts over the rest of the Horsemen and what they've done. He starts singing La Cucaracha.
Did you notice how he called Conan, "Yo, Conan, they say you're the man of 1,000 holds."
Yeah.
No, they don't say he's a man of 1,000 holds.
Yeah, that's what I put. I've never heard anyone say that Conan knew 1,000 holds, ever. But I did like how
1,000 Spanish words.
Yeah. In el pupitre. Woman flirts with Gene. I thought that was good, funny stuff.
Oh, yeah.
As always.
You know, it's funny, because as far as, like, you see her flirting with Gene, and then for those of you, once again, that have seen Legends House, how much of a kind of a perverted old man he is kind of pushed on that show. Maybe it's overdone a little bit, but... So that's 2 different happenings that have reminded me of things that have happened to Mean Gene on Legends House.
Yeah. Yeah, you're pushing stuff on the network like you work for WWE.
I know, damn it.
Up next, we had Conan versus Ric Flair for the United States Championship match. Solid match, about what you'd expect for Flair, Conan. Woman hits Conan with her heel. Flair puts his feet on the ropes, gets the pin, wins the United States title. Thoughts on this one?
I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a shame that here you have Ric Flair, who's won 13 world titles up to this point, and he's going to have to wear the U.S. title and take that off of Conan. I'm not sure how necessary that is. But it was a fun match, and like you said, about what you'd expect with woman getting involved in it.
I think they took it off of Conan so that they could repackage him. Because I think he goes away for a while, and then he comes back as the, like, Cholo top button, let me speak on this, Viva La Raza type shit that he did for so long. I'm pretty sure that's coming up now.
Yeah, but I didn't think that was until he was, 9th or 10th banana in NWO.
Well, no, he starts that gimmick before that.
I'd forgotten about that completely.
I mean, I don't remember, like I said, a lot of this is just kind of refreshing my memory. Like, once we get to Bash at the Beach, like once we get to the next Nitro, a lot of it starts getting fuzzy. Because, we're in the summer of 96. At this point, we've got summer baseball and then leading up to school. And, that's what it's that time with, you're 11 years old. You might have missed some time, and some memories kind of fade a little bit.
Sure.
Up next, backstage segment, another backstage segment with Mean Gene, still trying to identify the third man. Says he's listening to the door and trying to hear voices. And Gene kind of intimates that he has heard the voice before. So as a fan back then, automatically you're like, okay, it's an old WWF guy that Mean Gene has heard before. That's what you're thinking. And it turns out for sure it is a voice that he's heard before.
About 1,000 times and louder than shit.
Right. Then we kind of transition into Kevin Sullivan and the Giant versus Arn Anderson and Benoit. I didn't really love the build to this match, but I really enjoyed the execution of this match, and here's why. The Horsemen come out first, and they get attacked immediately. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I hate watching these matches where I hate you and you hate me and we're in this match because we hate each other and we're going to sit there and talk to each other, or we're going to try to Irish whip each other into the ropes. I've never been a huge fan of that. I've never understood that. So here, I really enjoyed that they just were beating the hell out of each other from the get-go.
Absolutely. And if you're watching this match independent of the build, and you see that happen, where they come out and just attack them firsthand, that tells you, okay, well, around this period of time, during the build, there was a lot of heat, a lot of hatred. So it's a lovely storytelling element if we're just taking that one match, packaging it, and showing it to someone. You just know.
Yeah. The story of the match was the Horsemen isolating Sullivan. Typical, tag match mentality, wrestling psychology here. The Dungeon of Doom were the baby faces in this match.
And I was going to talk to you about that perhaps and kind of get some clarification.
It's because they're in Daytona and Sullivan's from Daytona.
I think that has a lot to do with it, but at the same time, other than the NWO's comeuppance here, hell, your second hottest heels are the Horsemen, and that makes the Dungeon third banana, but here they are in Daytona.
I think the large part of it has to do with the fact they're in Daytona. They're in Daytona. The Horsemen have been cheating more than the Dungeon of Doom, and the Horsemen cheated the very start of this match with Mongo hitting the Giant, trying to hit him with the case, and the Giant runs back there. And, something to be said in the match with the match psychology. You've got one member of the team that just gets the hell beat out of him for the entire match. And you're like, he's never going to tag, and then finally he does tag. Another thing that really fed into the psychology for me was how there were very few pin attempts early in the match. They were just hitting each other and fighting. They wanted to fight. They weren't saying like, oh, well, I'm going to roll them up in the first 2 minutes because I want to win more than I want to kick this guy's ass. If there's a real grudge problem, I think you should go a while without pinning each other.
I couldn't agree more.
It adds into the realism of the combat element of wrestling.
I couldn't agree more. And if you're seeing a match with Kevin Sullivan and Chris Benoit, you had better get that. These two, I talked a lot on the show about how real it felt to me as a kid, the hatred between these two.
Yeah. They had a botched slingshot spot that kind of killed the hot tag, I thought. But Benoit and Sullivan fight back to the broadcast area. Giant chokeslams Arn for the win. Benoit Sullivan walks off thinking, Benoit's been laid waste to, and then out of nowhere, Benoit jumps off the broadcast stage into the sand with Sullivan, and then they're fighting back to the ring. I thought it was really well done. These two guys, the heat's not done with it. And then Woman comes out and tries to stop Benoit from hurting Sullivan, a little kind of subtle nod to their real life heat between these people. For those people who don't really follow everything, Woman and Kevin Sullivan have been married for quite some time. It was rumored that Benoit and Woman were cheating on their respective spouses with each other. Both of them divorced their spouses at the time and ended up getting engaged in 1997. So very, very intense real-life heat between these two men, and it kind of spilled over into the world of the work shoot in WCW at this time. You have that idea of that realism spilling over into some of this stuff, and I think that's what the nod here was, that Woman's coming out and trying to stop Benoit from hurting Sullivan, because trying to play on that real-life storyline, but they had not really kind of brought it into play, and they wouldn't, obviously. They're not going to talk about, like, real-life stuff like that, I don't think.
I have noticed throughout the years, it's true even today, that the more truth there is behind a storyline, the stiffer the match, the realer the heat, man, it's gonna create for some good stuff.
Right.
And I thought it was very eerie having her in there with Benoit.
Really?
Yeah, I thought it was very, because I knew about the whole Kevin Sullivan angle.
Yeah.
And, wouldn't that be, that's who Benoit murders later, right? That's yes. Her. Nancy Benoit.
Yeah.
So, like, that's part of what makes it kind of eerie for me.
Yeah, it's a whole odd deal. And as a wrestling fan, seeing so many of these guys that are no longer with us, watching this next match with Macho Man, he's no longer with us. In this match with Kevin Sullivan and the Horsemen, Benoit and, Woman no longer with us because of that tragedy. You go back up, Public Enemy and the Nasty Boys, neither of the Public Enemy are with us anymore. Big Bubba and John Tenta, both of those guys no longer with us. Too often in looking at retrospective stuff in wrestling, you end up having to kind of come to grips with the reality of wrestling deaths. And, Benoit is, they attribute that to CTE and the concussion syndrome that led to him kind of snapping, if you will. And it's just a tragic situation. But, when you're looking retrospectively, it's kind of an odd thing to kind of put into perspective. It's really weird to see those two interact, along with that whole idea of, stuff that you never really think about when you're 10 or 11 watching, because you have no idea. But you watch it as an adult, knowing all this stuff, it kind of frames it differently.
Well, I can't think of a single time that you and I, when we were living together in Birmingham, would watch a 6-man or an 8-man tag from like 1996, around this time, or before, and you and I are just counting the guys that have passed on. It'd be like 2 or 3 of the 6 if it was a 6-man tag. It'd be 3 or 4 if it was an 8-man. Like, I can't remember a match you and I watched where we're just like counting who's no longer around. It's terrible.
Terrible stuff. Main event, hitting the crescendo of the show. Macho, Sting, Luger versus the Outsiders. The story here early was that Hall and Nash come out alone, and the third man is nowhere to be found. Shivani and the other announcers put over the fact that they're really upset that the third man doesn't show up, and Hall and Nash say that they don't need the third man. that they've got enough. We'll be fine. And that's the main story of the match going forward. Now, with the build, and for you, this is the first time you'd seen this whole entire pay-per-view. And this is the first time you'd seen this match with all the build leading up to it in sequence. How did you feel, before we get into the match, how did you feel as the match starts? What are your thoughts?
Well, I can really give you the perspective of how 10-year-old Robert would have felt about the whole thing.
That's what I'm looking for.
Good, because I would have been good and hot that they did not come out with their third guy. There's been all this talk about the third man, and I'm a hook, line, and sinker sort of fan, especially as a 10-year-old. I want the third man to be present, and I'm also, furthermore, I'm ready for those two to get their asses kicked by three guys who I consider to be heroic and larger than life. And my mindset would be, God almighty, I cannot wait for this match, because if they would just, all the shenanigans over the past several weeks, your mindset is if they can only have a match, and here we have it.
For me, I remember specifically the 2-day period in which it led up to this match, watching WCW Saturday Night. And my cousin, who's 3 years younger than me, Nancy, her son, my Aunt Nancy, her son Tyler, he's my cousin. He's a big wrestling fan. And at this time, he was really not too much into wrestling, but this is what got him into it. We were watching WCW Saturday Night in my grandparents' room at my Nana and Papa's house, and we're watching the WCW Saturday Night, and they do, the whole gimmick leading up to it, and they show that stuff leading up to it. And he had watched some WWF with me, and he was pumped about it. And so he came over to the house and watched Bash at the Beach. And me being the older cousin, I loved Diesel and Razor Ramon, loved them. And I really never was a big WCW fan to begin with. So I was a huge Hall and Nash fan at this point. I was cheering for the bad guys, which was kind of not something that you do as an 11-year-old. And for me, I wasn't like a huge heel fan. I liked guys that I liked, and whether they turned heel or not, Jake the Snake, loved him growing up, and he turns heel in the early 90s, still loved him because I didn't care. I didn't agree with what he was doing, but I still loved him. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And in this match, I specifically remember thinking, well, I don't think they're not going to need a third guy. They'll be fine. And especially when they said that, I was like, yeah, they'll be fine. And then as the match goes, I really wanted to see who the third man was, and I was kind of disappointed when it was Hogan, because I never was a huge Hogan fan. As an 11-year-old, I understand it now as an older guy, but I just was, I'd had Hogan exhaustion at this point in 1996. But then when you see he develops into a totally different character, it was something totally different. I was pumped that Hall and Nash, these WWF guys that I loved, were about to do battle with Luger and Sting and Macho Man.
I think in retrospect, what a great way to even further assert yourself as a monster heel, to say, you know what, this can be a handicap match for now. It'll be all right. We got this.
Yeah, it fed into them as arrogant heels, which I loved.
Absolutely, and we
still
would
love
see
to this day
the smaller and more efficient the NWO was, and we'll get more and more into this as more and more guys are added. But when it was 4 or 5, like 3 to 4, like it was the equivalent to like 6 or 7 WCW guys in terms of reputation and acumen, and straight up healed them. Kind of a backdrop to that if you want to look at it that way, sure.
Yeah.
But it evens up because we have that one spot where Stinger does the Stinger Splash, Luger goes out, and they do the stretcher job. If I'm a kid, I'm freaking the fuck out.
Yeah. Because I mean, you're thinking like, okay, it's 3-on-2, it'll be fine, and then it's 2-on-2, and then you still haven't seen the third man. You're like, well, oh no, it's the baby faces are in peril, and there's nothing that can save them. There's nothing that the odds are evened at this point when Luger goes out, and they're like I talked about in the Horseman Dungeon of Doom match. It's a typical babyface heel match. The Outsiders beat the shit out of Sting for a while.
Oh man, the babyfaces in this match did not get a lot of offense.
No, and they shouldn't. You're trying to get huge heat here, and they do a good and in a good tag, old school tag psychology match. The babyface gets the shit beat out of him forever, makes the hot tag, and then that leads to the finish. And that's what happened here. You get the hot tag, and Savage comes in, Nash low blows him, and then all hell breaks loose. Hogan busts through, camera shoots on him, Shivani, Dusty, big, sunshine pumping, go get him, Hulkster, this is going to be great. And did you feel like Heenan blew up the spot, or it was just Heenan being Heenan?
Well, I think a little bit of both. As much of a cop-out answer as that might be, because I've been wrestling with that in my mind. Like, damn, that's a very Heenan thing to do, but if all three of them, because Heenan had mentioned earlier in the match, he's like, I usually wouldn't be on Macho Man's side. I hate that guy.
Right.
But by God, this is a serious situation. This is an unusual situation. Get a Macho. So, like, you can also, if you want to be, like, good and perfectly consistent, you can be like, he could have even said during that when Hulk Hogan's making his way to the ring, like, I don't like him either, damn it. But this is an unusual situation. And I think, speaking of that, throughout the match, the announcers did a good job of saying, at one point, Shivani says, look, folks, we're not calling this like a regular match because it isn't one.
Right.
This is an unusual situation. So in maintaining that consistency, I mean, Heenan could have just gotten on the bandwagon, Shivani and Dusty did too.
I thought that, all throughout the lore in looking at the NWO era, everybody talks about how Heenan blew up the surprise. But if you listen to the entire match commentary, and there's no third man, Heenan says, I could be sitting next to the third man, intimating that it's Dusty Rhodes. And he's pushing the fact that it could be Shivani, it could be anybody. We don't know. I can't trust anybody. Y'all shouldn't trust me. And that's what he's kind of pushing. He's saying, hell, I don't trust anybody. Something's up. And I think that people, when they found out, when hindsight's 20/20, in that moment, Heenan was always bad-mouthing Hogan back in the day. And he even brings that up at the end. Hogan drops the leg drop, revealing himself as a third man. All hell breaks loose. The fans are shocked. I mean, it's a huge, huge deal that it was Hogan. He's never been a bad guy in major wrestling in at least 12, 15 years at that point. I mean, he was a bad guy in AWA, but once he got to WWF and became the Hulkster, and Hulkamania starts running wild, I mean, it's a machine.
Absolutely, and a cash cow.
Yeah.
One can argue that it was a risky move.
Yeah.
By him, a risky move by Eric Bischoff, a risky move by WCW at large, but Jesus, did it pay off? And it's really, it's such a historic moment looking back on it. I can tell you right now that the younger me, had I gotten to watch this pay-per-view, I actually think I would have been distraught.
Really?
I think I would have been emotionally beside myself. I do. On our very first podcast, I told you about how I had a friend tell me, dude, you take this shit too seriously. You know?
Well, I mean,
seeing Hulkamania die was huge for people in that arena. I did notice some of them were popping pretty good for it.
Yeah.
Some of the fans that were like,
Older?
that kind of looked to be like 16 and older.
Right.
You know? But we would see debris fill that ring up, and that would be common on WCW television going the hell forward for however long.
I thought it was really good that you have Mean Gene come in the ring after.
Oh, yeah.
I think it goes with the continuity of Gene talking to everybody after the match. That, you know, he treats it no differently, but it also brings into the fact that this is a historical pairing from the annals of history in wrestling. You know, for the better part of a decade and in that era that built WWF, it was Mean Gene and Hogan. You know, let me tell you something, Mean Gene, that was synonymous with the build of Hulkamania. And to have them there at that time, it was kind of a circular, it was a big moment. It made the moment even bigger to have Gene there, and Gene pissed off saying, you know, this is ridiculous that you're hanging out with the likes of these two guys. I can't believe you would do this. And, you know, Mean Gene he's maintaining that, he's walking that line that Shivani kind of broached earlier, that, you know, he's doing his job, but he's also pissed off because he and Hogan are friends in the storylines and in the shoot world, if you will. Interesting to note, Hogan calls him the New World Order, and then he says at the very end of his promo, he calls him the New World Organization.
A couple of times.
So I thought his promo was okay. I thought he kind of rambled a little bit.
You thought his promo was just okay, dude.
I thought he kind of rambled.
Before this promo and this historic moment that you and I care enough to get together and do a podcast about 20 years later, this was the first of its kind from Hogan, and there was some shoot elements here to it. Like he talks about how he made a bunch of folks up north rich.
Right.
So
I like that part. But I thought he rambled a little bit.
Dude, he had a lot of ground to cover. He's explaining why Hulkamania is now dead, and he's with who he calls the New Blood, the New World Order of Wrestling. He had a lot of ground to cover. He covered why he stuck it to $1 Billion Ted. He promised me world-class caliber matches. He promised me millions, promised me movies, and then tells all the fans, like he covers everybody involved, from the WWF to the powers that be at TNT to the fans themselves, when he tells them to stick it.
I just thought it was a little more, it could have been shorter and it could have been a little more succinct. He just kind of rambles a little bit, in my opinion. And I thought, you know, if you take a little bit of stuff out, it's great. I think that, you know, once he says that, you know, Hulk Hogan was professional wrestling, I made a lot of guys up north rich. And then he talks about Ted. But then he goes on this little ramble about guys, you know, Bischoff would have still been selling meat in Minneapolis. Guys were filling their tank to get to high school. It's just, I thought it was a little too much.
Well, Hogan's an arrogant guy, and he has been for a long time. And so that's one of those elements of his.
So I didn't think it was arrogance. I just thought and, you know, Nash talks about this in one of the NWO retrospectives, how Hogan would get so long-winded in some of the promos and that's how, you know, when they start doing their little vignettes and it's in black and white and it's just like little spurts with like quotes and stuff, that's why they did that, because Hogan would just ramble. And you notice that a lot of times in his promos early on is he just kind of rambled and it was like very nonsensical. But it was cool because he was Hogan. and it really didn't matter because his fan base was largely kids. But, I mean, and I want you to notice as we go how his promos they just kind of drag on, and he's very repetitive.
Oh, no, I already, yeah. I mean, when I sit here and think about a lot of his promos going forward, they sure are that way. But in my opinion,
very repetitive. I just thought he could have been a little more succinct and been, I thought the "you can stick it" line was great, all that kind of stuff. I thought a lot of it was good, but okay isn't the right word. I thought it was good, but it wasn't great. It could have been great if it was shorter and he didn't ramble. If he was like, I made all them money, now I'm here to take this over. Ted screwed me. I'm here with these two guys. Fuck you fans. I'm out. That would have been great.
I'm happy to call it, man, because so many of his promos were the same before this, and then a lot of them will be the same after. I think it's the best promo you ever cut.
Yeah, maybe I'm just a little jaded from all my years. Like, I was never a huge Hogan. I was a Hogan fan up until like 89, 90.
Yeah, well, you see, I was one of the many children who, one of the millions of kids who he fucked over that day, man. That's what I was.
See, my turning point for me was once he, in the kayfabe world of professional wrestling, I felt like I had to pick a side at WrestleMania 6. And I was an Ultimate Warrior guy. So I was sticking with the Warrior, from that point on. And, I cheered for him against Sergeant Slaughter because who's going to cheer for Iraqi sympathizer? But, in his other feuds going forward, I didn't dislike the guys he feuded with. I really didn't mind when, he's feuding with Sid Justice, who was Sid Vicious. I loved Sid. I thought he was a great, compelling character. I loved all that stuff. And when he was with the Warrior, I liked him. I just didn't – it wasn't that I disliked Hogan during that era. It just had other guys to like more than him. Right. And then by the time the early 90s come along, I was a big Hart Foundation fan, and then Bret was a single star, and then I latched on to Bret and guys like Bret. I mean, I loved the Big Boss Man, really loved Dusty Rhodes, Jake the Snake, really liked Macho Man. But I don't know. Hogan just kind of overcooked my grits, to steal one of your terms,
well,
back then. So,
something else I noticed during this segment is that during his promo, it wasn't until you and I watched that WCW WWE Monday Night Wars documentary and then a book I read about this era, about the jabs that WCW would take through the NWO to WWF, yet ironically enough, it's a storyline about a faction taking over their company.
Yeah.
And so the jabs he took at WWF, well, it made me think of the documentary you and I watched, and they would do so many things like that going forward, and that was the kind of perspective I did not have as a 10-year-old around that time, that like, wow, they really are taking as many jabs as possible to those guys.
Oh, yeah. Tons of them.
So, but so fascinating that it would be in the vessel of a faction that's taking over us, and we're trying to beat them. How it seems counterintuitive, but no, it works beautifully for 86 weeks.
Shivani tells him to go straight to hell. Go to hell, Hulk Hogan. Straight to hell. And then,
well, just before that, yeah, but Mean Gene, Hogan finishes up his promo. What you gonna do, bro? And Mean Gene's all like, "Hey, don't touch me. I've got a fleet of lawyers," which is a funny line. And he goes, "Tony, Bobby, Dusty, damn it, let's get back to you," and walks off. And it sounds like he says something else. To me, it sounded like, and it was like the part that the mic didn't catch. It sounded to me like, "Tony, Bobby, Dusty, damn it, back to you, cocksucker."
Really?
And the one promo, the one like backstage interview where he's like, "Fuck it," you know. That's how it sounded. It sounded like cocksucker talking about Hogan, or cocksuckers plural talking about Hall and Nash and Hogan.
See, I'm
go back and listen.
I'm gonna have to go back to it and listen and see. That'd be. I heard the damn it, but I didn't hear cocksuckers. But maybe so. I mean, you never know. A lot of the like the guys that are like trailing off when they say stuff, and like we talked about when Hall and Nash come toward the broadcast booth and security stops them and Nash drops the F-bomb on him, made it seem so real. I wouldn't be surprised if he does say something to that effect. This is kind of put over the fact that, you know, he's legitimately upset and he did his professional duty and he's leaving the ring and he's in disgust.
You know, and also Gene went in there with no security.
Yeah. Mean Gene's a badass, though. I mean,
yeah, he's my grandpa. He could beat up anyone else's grandpa.
He is
the world's grandpa.
He is wrestling fans' grandpa.
That's a fact.
The grandfather of professional
wrestling. That is a fact. Went in there with no security, had 4 guys around him all night.
Yeah.
Doing his job.
Yeah, good stuff. Interesting to see how the rest of this progresses. You know, I've watched the next Nitro, and they're in the MGM studios, which I'm not a huge fan of that venue, but it's very iconic to me and, like, you know, kind of stirs up the cobwebs in my brain of the faction and the angles that would follow the NWO. So this will go up almost immediately before the next Nitro. So it'll be something that y'all can get right, like, back and forth. Episodes 8 and 9 will be kind of a package together because they happen on back-to-back nights. But decent show, I think. You know, the best 2 things on the show, the Horseman, Dungeon of Doom, decent. Rey Mysterio-Psicosis, no doubt, best thing on the show. Without a doubt, the main event is worth watching if you've already seen up to this point. And the crowd reaction to Hogan, I mean, you've seen that part of it, but the match leading up to it, I think is important to kind of frame the historical perspective, especially if you've been watching the Nitros. But the NWO is here. Now we got to see what happens. Who's next? What are they going to do? When do they show up on Nitro? And when they show up on Nitro, what are they going to do? You know, all these questions moving forward. Yeah, 10-year-old Robert thanks you for watching Bash of the Beach 1996 so many years later after catching up on all these Nitros leading up to it.
I'm telling you, I would have been so in such pain seeing it. And Schiavone says it best. He signs off saying Hulkamania is over and go right to hell. Strong words said on a wrestling telecast.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Even stronger to call a group of guys cocksuckers right there on the pay-per-view.
That's true. All right. Well, you have anything else on the show?
No, I sure don't. It's been fun getting to cover history each and every week, and we're going to continue doing just that. This was a lot of fun.
Well, that's going to do it for us today. Make sure you give us a follow on Twitter @AcombinedWeight. If you want to shoot us an email, @AcombinedWeight@gmail.com. Robert, plug your gaggle of social media.
Being _large everywhere except Facebook, Robert McElroy Actor.
There you go. Shoot us a follow. Make sure you keep up with everything. We've got some exclusive stuff for SoundCloud. You know, our stuff on PW Insider goes up a little earlier than SoundCloud, but we have some other stuff that you can listen to. We'll tweet about it, so just follow us on social media. We also retweet some cool stuff. Robert's the nice one. I'm the asshole.
Pretty much.
That's going to do it for us today. You've been listening to A Combined Weight. All right, we're going to leave you today with a new single by Evergrey. a band I really, really enjoy from Sweden. They're a progressive metal band. I've seen them live in Atlanta. They're incredible live. This song is called Distance. It's off their new album, The Storm Within, which comes out September 9th. Again, this is Evergrey with Distance.
Not getting through.